I got pregnant at 19 and my parents helped me raise my son, until they tried to force me to give him up for adoption. I fled to my sister's house, and now they're threatening legal action. I never thought I'd be posting here, but I'm at my wit's end. I'm a 22-year-old single mom to my amazing 2-year-old son, Ethan. His father isn't in the picture, and I've been raising him with the help of my parents. I got pregnant unexpectedly when I was 19, during my second year of college. I was studying graphic design and had dreams of working for a big advertising agency one day. Those dreams came to a screeching halt when I saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. When I told my parents, their reaction was exactly what I'd feared. My mom cried for days, lamenting about how I'd ruined my future. My dad couldn't even look at me for a week. They come from a conservative background, and having a child out of wedlock was something they never imagined for their daughter. The father, my boyfriend at the time, freaked out when I told him. He accused me of trying to trap him and said he wanted nothing to do with the baby. I haven't heard from him since. And honestly, I'm glad. I don't need that kind of negativity in Ethan's life. After the initial shock wore off, my parents slowly came around. They said they'd support me if I decided to keep the baby, which I had already decided I would. I dropped out of college and moved back home. It wasn't ideal, but I was grateful for their help. The pregnancy was tough. I had terrible morning sickness that lasted all day, and I was constantly exhausted. My mom took me to all my appointments and helped me prepare for the baby's arrival. Despite their initial disappointment, I could see my parents getting excited about becoming grandparents. Ethan was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in April. The moment I held him in my arms, I knew all the struggles had been worth it. My parents fell in love with him instantly. For a while, everything seemed perfect. They doted on Ethan, and I was able to work part-time at a local coffee shop while they watched him. But as Ethan grew older, things started to change. It began with small comments here and there. My mom would criticize the way I dressed him or the food I gave him. She'd say things like, "Don't you think he's a bit young for solid foods?" Or, "Why is he wearing that? It's too cold outside." I brushed it off at first, thinking she was just being a concerned grandmother. However, as time went on, their behavior became more controlling. They started dictating every aspect of Ethan's life, from his sleep schedule to the toys he played with. If I tried to do things differently, they'd accuse me of being an irresponsible mother. My dad, who had always been more laid back, started backing up my mom's decisions. He'd say things like, "Listen to your mother. She raised you and your sister. She knows what she's doing." It felt like I was being pushed out of my role as Ethan's mother. To make matters worse, my mom started making hurtful comments about my appearance. I had gained weight during my pregnancy and struggled to lose it while juggling motherhood and work. She'd make snide remarks like, "Are you sure you want that second helping?" Or, "You really should start exercising more. No man will want you looking like that." Her words cut deep, especially since I was already feeling insecure about my body. I tried to explain how her comments hurt me, but she'd brush it off, saying she was just looking out for my health and future. The final straw came last week. Ethan was due for his scheduled vaccinations, and I had made an appointment with his pediatrician. The night before, my mom casually mentioned that she'd been reading about the dangers of vaccines online. She suggested that maybe we should hold off on getting Ethan vaccinated. I was shocked. My mom had always been pro-vaccine when I was growing up. I told her that I'd done my research and was comfortable with the doctor's recommendations. She seemed to let it go, but the next morning when I was getting ready to leave, I couldn't find my car keys anywhere. After searching for half an hour, I confronted my parents. My mom admitted that she had hidden the keys. She said she couldn't let me poison her grandson with those vaccines. I was furious. I told her she had no right to make medical decisions for my child. We got into a heated argument, with my dad eventually stepping in to back up my mom. In the end, I had to call a cab to take Ethan to his appointment. The whole ride there, I was seething with anger and hurt. How could they undermine me like this? When we got back home, my parents were waiting for us. They sat me down for what they called a serious talk. They told me that if I wanted to continue living in their house, I needed to raise Ethan according to their rules and values. They criticized my parenting style, saying I was too lenient and that Ethan needed more discipline. Then came the kicker. My mom suggested that if I couldn't raise Ethan properly, maybe I should consider giving him up for adoption so he could be raised by a real family. I was stunned. How could she even suggest such a thing? Ethan is my world. The thought of giving him up is unimaginable. I have an older sister, Emma, who's 28 and lives in another state. We've always been close, despite the age gap. She moved away right after college, and now I understand why. She doesn't have much contact with our parents, usually just a call on holidays and birthdays. After this conversation with my parents, I called Emma in tears and told her everything. She wasn't surprised. She revealed that. Our parents had always been controlling, which is why she moved so far away. She told me about incidents from her childhood that I was too young to remember or understand at the time. Emma offered to let Ethan and me stay with her for a while to get away from the toxic environment. Part of me wants to take her up on the offer, but I'm scared. I've never lived anywhere else. The thought of uprooting our lives is terrifying, but staying here is becoming unbearable. Every day is filled with tension and criticism. I'm constantly walking on eggshells, afraid of doing something that will set my parents off. I can see how it's affecting Ethan too. He's become more withdrawn and clingy lately. I feel stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, I'm grateful for my parents' help. Without them, I don't know how I would have managed these past few years. They've provided a roof over our heads and helped with childcare while I worked. The thought of losing that support is scary. On the other hand, I can't let them control my son's life or undermine my parenting. I'm worried about how this will affect Ethan in the long run. He loves his grandparents, but I don't want him growing up in such a tense environment or thinking it's okay for others to disrespect his mother. I've been trying to save money, but between diapers, food, and other necessities, there isn't much left at the end of each month. The thought of trying to support Ethan on my own is daunting, but maybe it's necessary for both our sakes. I don't know what to do. Should I take my sister up on her offer and move? Should I try to find a way to move out on my own, even though it would be a financial struggle? Or should I try to set firmer boundaries with my parents while still living here? Any advice would be appreciated. I feel like I'm drowning and I don't know how to come up for air. Update 1. It's been a few weeks since my original post, and I wanted to update you all on what's happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their supportive comments and advice. Your words gave me the courage to take action. After a lot of soul-searching and several long conversations with Emma, I decided to take her up on her offer. The realization that staying with my parents wasn't healthy for me or Ethan finally outweighed my fear of change. I didn't tell my parents about my decision right away. Instead, I spent a week quietly packing our essential belongings when they weren't around. It was harder than I expected, both emotionally and logistically. Every item I packed brought back memories, both good and bad. There was the tiny onesie Ethan wore home from the hospital, now too small for him but impossible for me to part with. The photo albums my mom had, meticulously put together, documenting every milestone of Ethan's life. The handmade quilt my grandmother had given me when I told her I was pregnant. One of the few family members who had been unconditionally supportive from the start. As I packed, I found myself reminiscing about the good times too. The day my dad taught Ethan how to blow bubbles in the backyard, both of them laughing uncontrollably. The times my mom would sing lullabies to Ethan, the same ones she used to sing to me as a child. It made me question my decision more than once, but then I'd remember the controlling behavior, the hurtful comments, the constant criticism, and I knew I was making the right choice. While packing, I also reached out to my boss at the coffee shop. Sarah has always been understanding about my situation as a single mom. When I explained what was happening, she was incredibly supportive. She not only agreed to give me a good reference for job hunting in Emma's city, but also offered to let me pick up extra shifts before I left to earn some extra money for the move. The day before we were set to leave, I finally sat my parents down to tell them about our decision. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say countless times, but when the moment came, all my carefully prepared words flew out of my head. My mom's reaction was explosive. She burst into tears, alternating between accusing me of being ungrateful and begging me not to take her grandson away. She brought up every sacrifice they had made for me, from letting me move back in to helping with Ethan. It was hard not to feel guilty, but I stood my ground. My dad's reaction was quieter but no less hurtful. He said I was making a huge mistake and that I'd come crawling back when I realized how hard it was to raise a child on my own. His words stung, but they also reinforced that I was making the right choice. I told them that I loved them, but I couldn't allow them to control my life or Ethan's anymore. I explained that their behavior had been harmful and that I needed to do what was best for my son and myself. The next morning was chaos. Emma arrived early to help us move, and my parents refused to come out of their room at first. As we were loading the car, my mom came running out, sobbing and begging me not to take her grandson away. It was one of the hardest moments of my life. I hugged her, told her I loved her, and said that they were welcome to visit if they could respect my boundaries as a parent. The drive to Emma's place was long and emotional. Ethan was confused and kept asking for his grandparents. I did my best to explain that we were going on an adventure to live with Aunt Emma for a while. I tried to make it sound exciting, but my heart was breaking. Emma was. Incredibly supportive throughout the journey, reassuring me that I was doing the right thing and distracting Ethan with games and stories. We've been at Emma's place for a week now, and it's been a whirlwind of emotions. Ethan is slowly adjusting to the new environment. He's fascinated by Emma's cat, something we couldn't have at my parents' house because of my dad's allergies. Emma has been amazing, helping with childcare and giving me space to process everything that's happened. I've started job hunting and looking for affordable daycare options. It's overwhelming, but I already feel a sense of freedom I haven't experienced in years. Simple things like deciding what to feed Ethan for dinner without criticism or choosing his clothes without someone second-guessing me feel liberating. My parents have been calling and texting nonstop since we left. At first, it was a barrage of guilt-tripping messages and angry voicemails. Now, they seem to have calmed down a bit. I've been keeping my responses brief and polite, but firm. I've made it clear that while I'm open to rebuilding our relationship in the future, it will have to be on my terms, with respect for my role as Ethan's mother. There have been moments of doubt, especially when Ethan asks about his grandparents or when I'm lying awake at night worrying about our future. But then I'll have a moment, like yesterday when Ethan and I had an impromptu dance party in Emma's living room, where I realized that this newfound freedom is worth the struggle. I know this isn't going to be easy. I'm nervous about finding a job, about being able to support Ethan on my own, about navigating this new life. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. Thank you all again for your support and advice. It really gave me the courage to make this difficult but necessary change. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and I wanted to share how things have been going. Life has been a roller coaster, but we're slowly finding our footing in our new reality. First, the good news. I found a job. It's an entry-level position at a local marketing firm. The pay isn't amazing, but it's enough to cover our basic expenses, and there's room for growth. My new boss, Lisa, seems understanding about my situation as a single mom, which is a huge relief. She's even allowed me to have a flexible schedule so I can drop off and pick up Ethan from daycare. Speaking of daycare, we finally found an affordable one that Ethan seems to enjoy. It was a struggle at first. He cried every morning when I dropped him off, which broke my heart. But now he's made some little friends and gets excited to go. The staff there are wonderful and have been so patient with him as he adjusts. Emma has been an absolute lifesaver through all of this. She's been helping with Ethan while I work, and on the days when she's not available, she introduced me to her neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, a retired teacher who's been happy to babysit occasionally. Ethan adores her, especially when she reads him stories in funny voices. Ethan is adjusting well to his new surroundings, all things considered. He still asks about his grandparents sometimes, which is hard, but he's also enjoying the new experiences. He loves the park near Emma's house, especially the duck pond. We try to go there every weekend, and it's become our special time together. Now, for the more challenging part, my parents. They haven't given up on trying to get us to come back. At first, it was daily calls and texts, alternating between guilt-tripping and angry outbursts. I've had to be firm about maintaining boundaries, which hasn't been easy. There are days when I just want to give in, to have their help and support again. But then I remember why we left, and I stand my ground. Last week, things took an unexpected turn. My parents showed up unannounced at Emma's place. I was at work, but Emma called me immediately. She said they were demanding to see Ethan and threatening to call the police if we didn't let them in. Emma stood her ground and refused to let them in without my permission. I rushed home, feeling a mix of anger and anxiety. When I arrived, I found my parents still outside, my mom in tears and my dad red-faced with anger. I took a deep breath and approached them calmly. I told them that their behavior was unacceptable and that if they couldn't respect my boundaries, they wouldn't be allowed to see Ethan at all. We had a long, emotionally charged conversation right there on the front lawn. I explained how their controlling behavior had affected me and why I needed to make this change for Ethan's sake and my own. I told them about the anxiety I'd been living with, always worrying about their judgment and criticism. I shared how their words had chipped away at my self-esteem and confidence as a mother. It was hard, but I stood my ground. I think seeing me so firm and hearing how their actions had affected me really hit home for them. My mom broke down crying. Not the manipulative tears from before, but real, heartbroken sobs. My dad, who's always been more stoic, actually had tears in his eyes too. In the end, they left without seeing Ethan that day. But the conversation seemed to have an impact. My mom called the next day, apologizing for their behavior. She said they've realized they might lose us completely if they don't change their approach. It was the first time I'd ever heard her apologize like that. We've agreed to. Try a supervised visit next weekend. I'm nervous about it, but I'm hoping it's a step in the right direction. I've made it clear that any future relationship will depend on their ability to respect my role as Ethan's mother and my right to make decisions for my family. Through all of this, I've been amazed by the strength I've found within myself. It's not easy standing up to my parents, But every time I do, I feel more confident in my abilities as a mother and as an independent adult. I'm rediscovering the person I was before I became a mom, the girl who had dreams and ambitions. I've even started sketching again in my free time, something I haven't done since I dropped out of my graphic design program. It's not much, just doodles really, but it feels good to reconnect with that part of myself. Emma has been encouraging me to pursue it more, saying I could maybe do some freelance design work on the side once we're more settled. There's still a long road ahead, but I'm feeling more optimistic about our future. Ethan and I are building a new life here, one where we're both free to grow and thrive. It's not always easy, but seeing Ethan happy and carefree makes it all worth it. Thank you all for your continued support and advice. It means more than you know. Update 3. It's been 3 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some developments in our situation. The supervised visit with my parents went better than expected. They were on their best behavior, probably realizing it was their chance to prove they could respect boundaries. Ethan was happy to see them, which was both heartwarming and a little bittersweet. Watching him run into their arms made me realize how much I'd missed seeing that connection, despite everything that had happened. Since then, we've had a few more visits, always supervised and on neutral ground. It's been a slow process, but I'm seeing small improvements in their behavior. They're learning to ask before giving Ethan treats or making decisions about his care. There have been a few slip-ups, like when my mom tried to insist on Ethan wearing a sweater on a warm day. But they're trying. My job is going well. I've even gotten a small raise, which has helped ease our financial situation a bit. Lisa, my boss, has been mentoring me, helping me brush up on my design skills. She's even let me assist on a few small projects. It feels good to be using my creativity again. Ethan is thriving in his new daycare. He's made a best friend, a little girl named Zoe, and they're inseparable. His vocabulary has exploded, and he's becoming quite the little chatterbox. Sometimes when he learns a new word, I can see him hesitate before using it, like he's waiting for someone to correct him. It breaks my heart a little, reminding me of how controlling my parents were, but I always make sure to encourage him. Emma continues to be an incredible support. She's not only helped with Ethan, but has also been teaching me how to budget and manage my finances better. I'm slowly building up my savings, with the goal of eventually finding our own place. As much as I appreciate Emma's help, I know we can't stay with her forever. There was one incident last month that tested our progress. Ethan got sick with a high fever, and I had to take him to the ER. In my panic, I called my parents without thinking. To my surprise, they were supportive without being overbearing. They offered to come help, but respected my decision when I said I could handle it with Emma's help. My mom even called the next day just to check on Ethan, without any criticism or unwanted advice. This experience made me realize how much our relationship has evolved. We're not perfect, and there's still a long way to go, but we're making progress. I'm learning to set and maintain boundaries, not just with my parents, but in all aspects of my life. It's not always easy, but I'm growing stronger and more confident every day. I've also started attending a support group for single parents. It's been incredibly helpful to connect with others who understand what I'm going through. Hearing their stories and sharing my own has been therapeutic in a way I didn't expect. As for my personal life, I've made a few friends at work and through the single parents group. It's nice to have adult conversations that don't revolve around diapers or tantrums. I'm not ready to think about dating yet, but it's good to know that there's a whole world out there beyond being just a mom. Ethan and I have settled into a routine here. We have pancakes every Sunday morning, followed by a trip to the duck pond. On Saturdays, we explore a new part of the city. Last week, we found a small art museum with a children's area where Ethan got to paint on a giant canvas. Seeing his face light up as he created his masterpiece reminded me of my own love for art. There are still challenging days, of course. Days when I'm exhausted from working and parenting, when I miss the help my parents used to provide. Days when Ethan has a meltdown in the grocery store and I can almost hear my mother's critical voice in my head. But then there are moments, like when Ethan hugs me tight and says, "I love you, Mommy," unprompted, that make it all worthwhile. I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. I know there will be more challenges ahead, but I feel better equipped to handle them now. Thank you all for being part of this journey with me. Your support and advice have been invaluable.